Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. I hope you are doing great today. I am your fearless leader and host, Kevin Blanco, Senior DevRel Advocate here at Appsmith, and today we have something truly exciting lining up for you. If you are joining us live, please feel free to say hello on the chat. We'll love to see who's tuning in from around the world. Before we kick things off, I'd like to invite you all to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also turn on the notifications over there because we have something truly special in terms of content prepared for you this year. So you really don't want to miss it. We are preparing some important feature launches and events prepared just for you, and you definitely don't want to miss it. So subscribe right now. You should see on the screen the QR code. You can scan it very easily and take you directly to our YouTube channel, or just go to YouTube and find for Appsmith. Today's live streaming event is a special one because we are collaborating with Portkey to bring you a demonstration that's at the forefront of low code application development and generative AI. Let me ask you something. Have you ever dreamed or imagined for a way to have a smart mechanism that understands all of your data in your internal systems? And you can ask questions about smart queries and even update records without writing any code or filling out tedious forms. That sounds like a dream, right? Well, today we are turning that dream into a reality. Joining us is a special guest. We have featuring here Portkey's co founder, Rohit Agarwal. Hello, Rohit. How are you doing today?
All good, Kevin. Thanks for having me. It's really good to be on Appsmith's YouTube channel.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you for your time and for being here. I know you have been preparing something really special, and I want to thank you for your time for preparing all of this. Um, Today we are going to show you how to build an intelligent interactive app in less than 30 minutes. That's the idea. It might take a bit further, but it's all about you learning new stuff. But before we get into that, Rohit, why don't you explain to us what Porky is and what your journey has been so far?
Yeah, thanks for that, Kevin. So, Portkey is essentially a control panel for AI apps. So, me and my co founder, we've been building AI apps for the last 3.5, 4 years. This was early GPT three times when it was private.
Mhm.
And while building the application was a lot of fun, taking it to production was a lot of challenges. So, how do you solve for logging, metrics, analytics? Where do I store my prompts? How do I version these? How do I connect to multiple LLMs together outside of OpenAI? And through all of these challenges, we sort of built Portkey, which is an LLM ops platform, which allows you to connect to 100 plus models out there, manage all of your prompts in one place, and then find the best observability stats on it. So we've got logging, analytics, and the likes. And today, I think I'm most excited about creating a use case with Appsmith on how you can leverage generative AI inside a low code platform like Appsmith. And then how does Portkey come in and help you manage the generative AI side of things better? So, yeah.
Okay, perfect. That sounds pretty interesting. So we could say that Portkey is kind of a middleware between all of these services and your application in a way
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
with superpowers. A middleware with superpower. Well,
Yes.
that's great. And just to get people excited about it and understand the context and the benefit of using Portkey and why this is crucial for a lot of businesses. Can you like explain different business use cases that you have seen Porky being really useful, or different areas is that you can implement all of these crucial,
Right.
applications that can quickly access data or be a game changer?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think so generative AI, we've seen three use cases come up primarily. So one is, and this is the most popular one, is just answering questions on data, on documents, on my knowledge base, on my store, or just the general web as well. So answering
Mhm.
questions is, and that's a very broad category. And today I think we'll do a bunch of this stuff with answering questions on data. But then
Mhm.
uh, extracting the right context from a wealth of information and then crafting an answer is something that generative AI is really good at. So there's a technique called RAG. That is something
Mhm.
that's very popular on Portkey, and we'll definitely talk about how that's done. The second use case is more around summarization. So I have this long YouTube video. Can you summarize it into 3 points for me? Or here is a transcript of my entire call, summarize that. Here is a PDF, answer these questions on top of it. So summarization or changing the format of content is the second big use case that we see with generative AI that comes up quite often. And the
Mhm.
third piece is pure generative. So I want to create content, write a tweet for me, write an email. Um, Given this context, why don't you create a song for me, a poem for me? So those are all the pure content generation use cases, and that is across text, audio, video, images, and that's so at Portkey. What people do is they use Portkey to connect to any of these generative AI models, and essentially, as
Mhm.
you mentioned, right, this is the middleware that helps you manage all of this in production. So we'll make sure your prompts are versioned. We'll make sure you're seeing where your users are finding value, and where they're missing out, and how can you improve your application continuously. A lot of this is done directly through a user interface, making it really
Mhm.
easy for you to manage all of these things superbly. So, like if you're making an API call to OpenAI, you could actually see that happen, visualize that on the Portkey interface, making it much more convenient for you to write this connector code, and then make it part of your application.
Right. Well, that sounds pretty interesting, and I know probably everyone's excited to see what Porky is, in function, and to make it that happen. So, I think we can get started. Why don't you just tell us what you're going to be building on your end, and then I can explain what I'm going to be doing in our end, and so we can get started right on the hands-on.
Absolutely. I think on the broad side, we're trying to build a chat with your data application. And Kevin, feel free to add more later. But it's essentially a lot of times I have been in situations where I have data in my database and I just want to quickly get some answers from it. Now, I could write these SQL queries and I know a little bit about it, but I do have to look up Stack Overflow or go to ChatGPT, get the SQL query, and then get the answer. Or I'll ask a data analyst on my team to say, give me this answer. What we'll try to do today with Portkey and Appsmith is, on Portkey side, we'll write two prompts.
Mhm.
And a prompt is essentially a template which will ask GPT to convert a user's question into valid SQL.
Mhm.
This is the SQL that we can run, get the data back. And once we have data from the SQL, we will actually ask GPT using the question and this data to formulate a good answer. We will then integrate these prompts into Appsmith, and build a nice little UI over it to help me chat with my data better.
Mhm.
Yeah, but over to you, Kevin.
Perfect. No, that makes total sense. And the idea behind this is that we can also see the actual database, the SQL database with all of the data. It's going to be a sample database, very similar to something you might have in your own business. In this case, we're going to be controlling orders. We have a database with orders, and you will be able to preview the data in AppSmith. Then we will generate the UI forms to integrate with Portkey to use the prompt that Ruiz is going to be building, and you're going to be able to integrate the API request, the GRUB request. Then we're going to be actually grabbing the SQL syntax that Rohit's prompt is going to be retrieving to us, and actually use that in a query in AppSmith, because that's the idea, that we can actually get useful prompts from our data and actually execute the query and send it back to Portkey's API to get a final response, which is like human readable response about your data. So that way you're going to get from your existing data not only the SQL syntax response, so you can make the query, but actual a human readable response about your data. So you will be able to ask things about, in this case, as an example, the orders. You will be able to ask things like, give me all of the orders of last month, which quantities major to three, and it's going to give you not only the SQL syntax but also the actual human readable responses of the amount of orders with that specific things you asked. So it's actually talking to your data. That's what we're going to be building today, right, Rohit?
Yep, absolutely. Yes,
Awesome. So let's get started. Let's you can start sharing your screen and start building the portkey portion.
absolutely. Okay, here we go. So you can actually go ahead and sign up at portkey.ai. And once you come in, you'll come onto a dashboard like this. The first thing I did was I just created something called a virtual key. So this is essentially a connector to my OpenAI API. I don't want to expose this API. I want to keep it in one single place. So Portkey has a vault. I can actually go here, choose OpenAI or any of these AI providers that are available with Portkey, enter my API key, and create a virtual key. So this is now a virtual key, which is only going to work along with my API key. So that's how my OpenAI key is set up. Second, now what we want to do is create a prompt template that takes in a user question and converts it to the right SQL format. Now, this is going to be fun. Let's just follow along. So I go to the prompt screen. So this is Portkey's prompt library. I was just testing a few prompts before this, but we're going to start creating a prompt template from scratch. So I click on create. You see the prompt editor opens up. I can start writing my prompt here. It already has selected the virtual key that I just created some time back. And we're going to use the GPT-4 turbo models. And I'm just going to leave everything else as standard. But you have all of these parameters to tweak if we needed to. Great. Let's start writing the prompt template. So I'm just going to say you're an expert SQL coder. You understand a table structure and can convert a natural language question into a SQL query. Next, what we'll do is we will actually give it the syntax for our table and then feed in the question. So I say, given the following table structure, this is the SQL for the table that we're using. This is the query that the user asked. And I can actually write the query. So if I use double curly braces, it lets me write a query here. So for example, my query could be, um, how many orders in last week? And this is just a test, right? Just to see this query is working. It says write the SQL statement for it. I can test it out easily. So yeah, it's giving me SQL. This is the right SQL. So once I'm done, this is all set up. I will say save prompt. It asks me for prompt name. Let me just call it SQL. I save this prompt and it's done. So this is my first prompt that is ready. What I'm going to do is now, instead of sharing this prompt with Kevin, I can instead share the API. So I'm going to give this API this piece to Kevin and let him directly use it within Appsmith. So we're going to do this. So this is the first prompt. I can also just quickly set up the second prompt and then Kevin can directly take over. The second prompt is now when we get the SQL data back from Appsmith. So Appsmith runs the SQL query on the database, gets the data back. We want to convert that data into a proper answer. We could always show the data directly, but it's not as fun, right? We are talking with our data and we want it to be more conversational. We want Appsmith to answer a question, not show me data. So that's the second prompt. Again, the same thing. We're just going to call this answer. The system prompt will just be you're a data analyst who's great at answering questions with insight. And I'm going to write a prompt that says, this was the user question. This was the data fetched from the database. And based on the above user question, create an insightful answer and reply with a JSON object. So what we're doing this time is we're saying we want to make sure that GPT does not hallucinate or add a lot of explanations to it. So we're saying, give me a JSON output. Um, and the way we do this is we select the turbo model, we change the response format to JSON, and we're good. So now whenever this prompt is run, it with an answer field in it, and that will be the textual answer that the user is expecting. We'll again save this prompt. And then we have the answer prompt ready. We can again share this REST API. We can insert this into Appsmith and get our answer. So great. Now have both of our prompts ready in Portkey. We are going to integrate this within Appsmith. And once we're done, we can come back here to see what did we actually log in Portkey, so that when your users start using this Appsmith app, you can actually keep tracking how much is your cost, how is your app performing, and are you giving the right answers to your users or not. But yeah, for now, we'll
Nice.
pause on the Portkey side and head over to Appsmith.
Cool. Well, first of all, that was super fast. I mean, it's extremely easy to use your platform, that's for sure. And it has incredible features in just like, I don't know, 5 minutes that you explained. That's quite a lot. So, in case that you have questions to this point, let us know in the chat. I'll be answering in the chat if you have questions about what just happened and everything, or you need, the accesses to log into Portkey, etc. But right now that Rohit created those two endpoints, let's go to Appsmith and see how we can actually enable this and actually build something useful. So let me share my screen and start building it. All right, so the first thing is here I am at Appsmith, and if this is familiar to you, that's great. But if not, this is the first thing you will see when you land on an Appsmith application. It is the home page where you have your workspaces, your applications, and also templates where you can start with from building blocks. This is something we are introducing very recently. We had existing templates that you could use, like for example, all of these different use case templates, but now we also have building blocks, which is you can start not from scratch, but for something that you're probably going to be using, let's say editing data, table lookups, updating data, sort and filterable, etc. But for this sake, we're going to start with a Scratch application. Let's create a new workspace because I want to have separate data sources for this, and I'm going to call it Portkey plus Appsmith. And now that we have this, we can create a new application. One thing you will notice, or in case you didn't notice, is that I'm running Appsmith locally. This is not the Appsmith cloud version, it's the actual Appsmith self-hosted that I'm running using Docker. And that's one of the benefits that you have from Appsmith. Remember, there is completely open source and you can execute it on any type of environment, not just the cloud version that we offer for free, but also you can use the business edition, which is the one that I'm using right now that you can try for free, or the enterprise edition you can also run on your self-hosted in your own computer. So you have your own Appsmith ecosystem running locally in your own machine. So now that we're here, the first thing I'm going to be doing is actually bringing the database that we're going to be asking questions about. So that way we can preview the data and we can ask actual questions about that data. So we go to the data section here on the left, you will see data sources. I don't have any data source, so let me create one. We have a bunch of connectors out of the box, and I'm going to be selecting PostgreSQL. And I'm going to be entering my information. This is actually my password. My username is Kevin. The database name is Portkey. And the host, I have it around here. Let me copy it. There you go. We can try this without actually saving it. Let's see if it works. There you go. It worked. So let's give it a name. We can call it the way you want. I'm just going to call it data source and save it. So once we save our database or any type of data source, Appsmith gives you the ability to get a glimpse of what data is over there. So we will see that we actually have the orders table, and in this table we have a bunch of orders. We have around 1,000 orders that we created just for the sake of testing. Now what I'm going to be doing is going back to the editor. Sorry, I hid this. There you go. I'm going back to the editor, and here I'm going to start building my first portion. Let's drag and drop a table because, like I said, we want to see the data that we have in our database just for the sake of testing. And let's connect the data. clicking the button here, connect data, you will see all of your available data sources. Appsmith has sample databases that you can use for testing, which is great. We have a sample movie MongoDB database and a sample users PostgreSQL database, but I'm going to be using the actual data source that we just created. Then I'm going to select which table I want to showcase in this table. I'm going to say the orders, and the table feature. Sorry, the table widget has a bunch of features like searchable, sortable, etc. So I can select which field I'm going to be using for searching. I'm just going to call it the title, and then connect the data. So that way, here we can see. Let me turn off editable. So here we can see the order information, and we have pagination, etc. over here. So you can paginate and see all of the different records in this database. So let's connect the first prompt that Rohit created in this portion. So the first thing we're going to do is actually create an input for people to actually ask about it. And I'm going to also put here a number, a text widget with a number, because I want to do it as a step. So this is going to be the first step. You want to ask something about your data. Let's make it large. It's kind of easy to read. And here I'm going to say, ask whatever you want about your data. And now let's bring also a button. Let's put it here and let's say ask. So that's the first thing we have to do now. If we noticed when Rohit was building the prompts, there was this portion where he could share the REST API for me to integrate that. So Rohit already sent that to me via a message. So let me find that out around here. And it's actually a curl request. So we have two ways to do this. The first one is actually creating a REST data source, going to the data and entering here the REST API, and just, from the curl command, grab the host, grab the headers, etc. But we also support a curl import. So let's select that one. And here I'm just going to paste the actual curl, and Appsmith is going to understand everything, the headers, the parameters, the body, etc. And it's going to actually create a query for us. So let's click import. And as you can see, we come to the actual API query UI. This is very similar probably to you. It looks very similar to something like Postman or something like that. So here I have our API. Let's call it Portkey. Portkey. And as you can see, it's a post request. This is the endpoint. And then we have here the headers, the parameters, and the body. Here in the body, we can send if we want to be a stream, true or false. I'm going to actually say it false because I don't want this to be a stream. It's actually going to be just a response. And here we have the variables, the actual query. This is what we actually get from the input field that we created, what the people are actually going to be asking about our data. So the way we do this is very simple. As you can see here in the widgets, every widget has an ID. When you click a widget, you will see all of the properties on the right. This one, this is the ID of that specific input. So I'm going to call it question. So I can reference this question widget in any portion of our application, on a data source, on a JavaScript object, on a API request, just like I'm going to be doing right now. So going back to the Explorer, to the port key, here all I have to do is, and let me see if I can delete this. There you go. All I have to do is double call the brackets and then the name of the ID we just gave it. Remember, it was question, and then we can do that text. That's the property that actually get the text from that specific widget. There you go. Now, one thing I want to do is go to the settings of this request because I don't want this to run on the page load. And as you can see, it's turned it off, but sometimes it might be on. I want to execute this request using the button that we created. So there you go. We can actually give it a shot right now. Actually, we can even try it out without binding it to the actual field. So we can actually just make the question here. And I'm going to ask, give me the number of orders which quantity is more than three. If you saw on the orders table, we had a quantity field, and I want to know how many of those orders have more than three in the quantity field. And we can run this to actually get a response to make sure that it works. And there you go. If we make this bigger, we will be able to see that it actually retrieved an SQL syntax. They actually give us the SQL that we have to run against our database to actually get that data that I'm asking about. So this is great. Now that we know what the structure of the response is, we can actually print that response in the UI. So the way we do this is just, we can drag a text widget, and here we bind the data. So we can say port key, because that's the name of the API query we created. That data, it has the response data. And then you can pretty much visualize the structure of the response. In this case, we can do choices, because that's the array that all of the choices responses comes. As is an array, normally I'm going to be grabbing the first portion because it only has one single response. And then I'm going to grab the message property, which is an object. It has all of the messages that Portkey retrieved to us. And last but not least, the actual content. That's what I want to see. And there you go. Here is printing the value of the SQL that we actually ask hard coded. Now let's bind this, what the people are going to be entering here, to the button, and then getting the response and printing it here. So the way we do this is very simple. Again, we go to our port key query, and we are going to be actually changing this to the data binding that we got. Remember, double color braces, question, that text. And now we're able to go back to our widgets and actually bind the button to the onClick event to call that API request. And it's super simple. All we have to find is the onClick event, click the plus icon, execute a query, or we could execute a JavaScript function, but in this case, it's going to be a query. And we're going to say portkey. Remember, that's the name we gave it to the API. And then we can have some actions. We could also pass parameters, but right now I'm not going to be using parameters because I'm actually going to be reading from this field right here. And on all success, I'm going to show a alert saying that everything went well. A success alert saying response is back. Now we got a response. There you go. So we could deploy this and actually give it a shot. So the data on the database is loading. There you go. There's the data. So as you can see, we have order ID, customer names, quantity, order date. So we could ask anything about this specific information. I'm going to, again, ask the same thing. Give me the number of orders, which quantity is more than three in the last 2 months. And let's ask for it. So what's going to happen here is we're going to call the API that Rohit created for us, and that's going to retrieve us the actual response from the AI. And there you go. This is the SQL syntax that we can actually use to query our database and actually get the useful data. So let's do that actually right now. There's one thing we have to do here, which is this information here is actually not, we have to basically get the data, the actual SQL syntax, just the SQL syntax, to actually use it on a query. And the way we do this is with a simple regex. We're going to be using JavaScript objects to process this text right here and actually just get the syntax out of it. That's going to be our second step. So again, I want to keep this very visual to you. So I'm going to be creating like a second step here so that people understand what you have to do. Now, from this reply that we got back, let me actually put it here. We are going to add another button, which is actually getting the SQL from this response here. We could do it directly on the response, but I also wanted to show you how you can create JavaScript objects that interacts with the UI. So let's add another button here, and we're gonna call it just get SQL query. And again, the way we do this is with JavaScript. So if you go back to Explorer, here under the queries, you will find JavaScript objects. So just by clicking that, we're going to have a new JavaScript object. And here we can write pure JavaScript. Again, remember that Appsmith supports multiple JavaScript libraries. You can just import your libraries here. In this case, we come up with Lodash and Moment, but you can import any type of custom JavaScript library that you want, and you can use that on your JavaScript objects. For now, I don't really need any type of custom JavaScript library, but that's the way I create a JavaScript object. You can put the name you want. I'm just going to call it Portkey functions. And the first thing I'm going to be doing here is let's remove all of this. And one thing I'm going to do is define a variable, which is going to be my actual regex. So this regex right here is going to be looking up for anything that is after the SQL word and everything that is that before the actual tree thicks over here. So that's going to actually give us only the SQL syntax that we need. That's the regex basically. And now we can do a function here. This function, we're going to call it get SQL, and it's going to be a function that requires no parameters right now. And the first thing we're going to do is actually get all of the text that matches the regex that we just defined. So let's create a const called matches, and we're going to say, all of the text, the text that we got in the response, we're going to pass it through this. So going back to the widgets, I want to give it this a name because right now it's text2. That's not super easy to read. So I'm going to call it Portkey response. Portkey response. There you go. So now we can reference that very easily in the JavaScript function. So again, as we type, we're going to get autocomplete. Portkey response. Not is visible. And we're going to do just the text. That's going to give us the actual text. And we're going to do the match function, which is going to be matching the regex. And all we have to do is pass the actual regex variable that we defined over there in the top. So this is going to give us the actual text that matches the regex that we created. Now, what I'm going to be doing is defining another constant, which is going to be the actual SQL portion, because the match, what it does is going to retrieve us an array of text that matches the regex. And all I want to do is just grab the first one. So all I'm going to do is called matches in the position number 1, not in the 0. That's the structure normally that a regex match has. And now all we have to do is actually bind this text to something, because I want to use that something. So what I'm going to be doing is mapping this to another text field. So let's create another text field. And this one, I'm going to call it final response, because this is the final SQL response. Final response. And here is going to be empty for now. And we're going to actually define the text via JavaScript object. So coming up here, all we have to do is final response that set text. This is going to actually set the text of that text field. And we have to pass the SQL portion, which is the first portion of the regex match. And that's it. Very simple piece of JavaScript. And now how do we do this? How do we make this work? Very simple. We go back to our widgets, to the button, and we're going to bind the onClick event to that JavaScript option, which remember the name is get SQL. And that's it. We could do another on success or something like that. For now, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to leave it like that. So if we deploy this again, we ask the same thing. We ask for it. Now we got the actual textual response from the APIs, the AI service, and now we're going to get only the SQL query. And there you go. It's completely clean. This is the actual SQL syntax that we want to execute the query directly to our database. So there you go. We have second step ready. Let's go back to the final step, which is actually calling the second endpoint that Rohit created for us to actually get a final human readable response about our data. So the way we do this is very simple. All we have to do is create a SQL response, sorry, an SQL query to our database to actually get a response. Okay, so let's go back to our editors here, to the queries. And in the queries, you will be able to create a new query. Very simple. All you have to do is click the plus icon, a data source query, because this query is going to be against the database using the SQL that Portkey retrieved to us. We can put whatever name we want. I'm going to name it Portkey Smart Query. And all we have to do is just grab the final SQL text that we create, that we got from JavaScript. And remember that we bind that text to this specific text field that we have here that we named final response. So all we have to do really is on our query, just do this final response that text, because remember that on that field we are storing, or we are putting, the actual final SQL syntax. And one important thing is that we have to turn this off, because we're actually passing this from a text field into the query builder. If we don't turn this off, it's not going to be working. That's it. Now all I'm going to be doing is, in another step, in another button, which is the last step, I'm going to create the last step, which is the third step. Let's add a button that actually execute the final step that we're building here. We can name it whatever we want. I'm just going to name it execute query. And what we want to do here is, the first thing is call the database using the SQL response that we got back. And when we have a response from the database query, send that database query to the portkey prompt that Rohit created for us, so we get a final human readable response. So let's do that. When we call this execute query, all we're going to be doing is actually a click event function, execute a query, and the name we put it is portkey smart query. And once that succeeds, sorry, let's do a alert first. A success, query executed correctly. And after that, like I said, we want to call the endpoint that Rohit created for us. So going back to the editor, all we have to do is create another curl request with the structure that we got from portkey. So let's do that. Let's create a new data source. Let's create a curl import, and let's paste it out here. As you can see, what's happening here is we have the endpoint that we got from portkey, and on the variables, we have to pass the question, which is the actual question that the user put at the beginning, and the database data. This is where we put the actual response from the database query that we are going to be executing using the response from portkey. All right, so let's click import. And here in the body, we have to make the changes here to bind the data from the results. So the way we do this is, the first thing again is binding to the question. Remember that we call it question, as far as I remember. Yeah, question.text. That's the first thing. And the second is the database data query. Now, the way we do that is very simple. All we have to do right now is using the portkey smart query. That's the name we put it here. As you can see, portkey smart query. So we do portkey smart query. That data, that's the actual data response from the query itself to the database. And we just have to make sure that we stringify this using JSON.stringify. So JSON.stringify. And there you go. That's all we have to do. This is the way we pass parameters into it. And yeah, that should be it. Let's put a name. Let's call it port key formatted, because it's going to be the formatted response. And let's try it out. Let's ask something different. Let's say that which give me the number of all orders from the last 2 months which payment method is PayPal. So I want to get all of the ones that were paid with PayPal. Here we got the SQL syntax. Now let's just get the actual SQL to pass along to the query, and let's execute the query. So this is going to grab this SQL syntax, go to the database, execute the query, retrieve the data back, and then send that data to the port keys response so we can get a final readable response. So there's going to be doing that. The query executed correctly, and then it called the other endpoint. Now we have to just print it out, print the final value so you can actually see it. So the way we do this is again with another text field. Just put this here at the top, and let's put the text here and call it the name of the API query, which is portkey formatted. That data, and let's take a look at the structure of that specific response. See, we might get an error. Text 2.
Kevin, I think there's a question. There's a
Mm-hmm.
colon missing
Yeah.
after question.
Oh, that's it. There you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Have you here for debugging. So that's the cool stuff about live coding, right? So let's give it a shot one more time. So the structure of the response is very similar to the one that we got here, because it is very similar. We have the data, that choices, that message, that content. In this case, it's going to be pretty much the same structure. But all we want to do is also format it with JSON parse, because we are going to be getting it as a string. So we want to make sure that we parse it as a JSON. And again, we're going to call it final, no, port key formatted. That data. There you go. And all I want to do right now is, make sure that this is not called on page load. The port key formatted. Let's turn it off again, because we're going to be calling this on demand with the button. And let's give it a final shot. Okay, I ask for the number of orders, which number is more than three. We got the SQL. Let's clean it up with JavaScript and then execute the query. The query executed is going to be correct. And let's see, maybe I did it bind the last portion. Let's go back to our widgets, execute the query. There you go. I'm not doing it. That was the last portion. So here on the button, once we execute the actual query to the database, we show the alert. Now we actually have to call the other endpoint. That's the portion we're missing. So we're going to be calling Portkey formatted. We don't have to pass any parameters. Here we can show an alert, for example, success or something like that, but I'm just going to leave it like that and deploy. So that should be the last portion. Spapel. There you go. It finally finished, and it says there are no orders where the quantity is more than four and the payment method is PayPal. Huh, interesting. Let's just ask for quantity is more than four without the payment as PayPal. One thing we could also do as well is actually print the result of the SQL query in a table. So that way we can preview the query of that SQL syntax in a table widget. We could also do that. So execute the query. That's going to go to the actual database, get the data, and there you go. The number of orders with a quantity greater than four is 201. So here we finished the whole cycle. We actually got the connection to our database, an existing database. We used the port key prompt that Rohit created for us to understand information about our data and actually generated a useful SQL syntax prompt. Then we use that SQL syntax to actually query the data and get a useful response that we could actually put in a table widget, for example. And finally, we are retrieving that response back from SQL, the actual SQL response from that data to the other port key prompt that Rohit created for us very easily a few minutes ago to actually get a human readable response. So this could be a totally functional app around our data that we can ask information and retrieve useful human readable responses. This could be very useful for HR department, sales department, so you don't have to do complex queries and analyze the data in a complex manner. You can just make human responses readable for the sales team, for the marketing team, for any of your HR teams, independently of what your data is. All you have to do is actually get a portkey to analyze the data, understand the data structure, send all of these responses back, and actually get a useful human readable response. Rohit, what do you think about that?
No, I think this was great. I was thinking, what we could even do is, um, pull up an order from this customer and maybe cancel it. So you could even not just do select statements, but it could
Right.
be update statements and insert statements. And I think it's really cool that in what, less than 40 minutes, Appsmith and Portkey just let me talk to my data in natural language.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, we didn't try this. Let's just give it a shot. This is not pre-planned or everything. How can I delete all orders which quantity is just one? I don't know if there's just orders with just one. Let's just do which quantity is two. Because that's true. And I not only select, but I'll um, actually execute a query. The command you executed to delete the orders with quantity of 2 has successfully affected 205 rows in the database. This means that 205 orders with a specific quantity of 2 have been deleted. So if we refresh this page, because we actually executed the query against the database, we shouldn't see any any quantity with two. And that's actually true because we now have only 795 records and we actually had 100 records. And it makes sense because that's the query we run. So it actually works, not only consulting, but actually executing data, retrieval, deleting, updating in the actual database. That's pretty awesome.
Yep, yep. I
That's
think
super
also goes to
interesting.
show that you need users of database who are not allowed to delete queries or to write delete queries so easily.
Yeah, obviously we don't want that so easy to delete records, but that's the cool stuff about Appsmith. You can build custom logic around, if the query has a delete statement in it, we could actually analyze the statement here in the JavaScript object, in the JavaScript that we wrote, and actually
Yeah.
parse here the SQL portion, and just make something that analyzes if there's any delete. Don't run that basically.
Yeah, that's true.
Excellent.
In fact,
So you
I could
mentioned,
actually show all of this
yeah,
getting logged in Portkey as well.
yeah,
Maybe,
that's the last portion we wanted to review.
yes. So what's been happening here is, so every request that's going out to OpenAI is actually
Mhm.
getting logged here. So if you see, this is the last log. So this is the query. Um, let me see. Yeah. So you see, how can I delete all orders which quantities do? And data
Mhm.
fetched from DB was this, and then we crafted the answer, and this was the answer. So especially
Nice.
if I was the Appsmith developer, I've given it out to a bunch of folks. You can actually just quickly see if this is a good answer or not. I could even just rate this response here, so which is feedback coming into the system, and I can actually make use of all of this information later on. So essentially, everything is logged. I can even see
Mhm.
how much money Kevin spent on my account. So we spent 10 cents. So that's pretty cool. You can actually get a sense of how is this application performing, how much time is it actually taking for the query to respond, etc. Um, and Portkey gives you access to all of these analytics and logs, and you can see
Mhm.
these prompts can just be updated as easily as this. So I could just go in and say, I don't want an OpenAI call. Instead, make a call to Mistral or some open source model that you really like. So it just
Mhm.
makes it easy for me to keep updating these prompts, and I don't have
Right.
to go and update anything in Appsmith later on. So it's just this nice separation of concerns where you're
Exactly.
managing your AI pieces in Portkey, and then Appsmith is all of the amazing business logic that you're creating using generative AI. Yeah.
Right. That's true. Now, once that this is integrated into Appspeed, you're right. You can just go to Portkey, and if you need to enhance the way that the prompt works or make it more functional, that's great because we already have it integrated, and you can do that in the backend without having to affect most of the things that we already did in the front end, which is totally great. And the analytical portion, that's super valuable because, yeah, we could use any of the existing backend APIs for AI, generative AI, and things like that. But we don't have that way to understanding our expenses, how we're spending that, how can we improve our queries and our prompts, etc. So this is definitely super valuable to everyone out there building smart business applications. Great. So
Yep.
I think we are coming to an end here. We have been talking about like 50 minutes already. I think that's good enough for now, so people don't get bored or overwhelmed. But I do want to close up this portion saying thank you so much, Rohit, for joining our live stream today. It has been truly wonderful. And for those who joined later or are watching this video afterwards, where we learned today has been creating an account in Portkey, basically generating prompts that connects to OpenAI and understands our data. Then, after those two prompts were created, we integrated into Appsmith, where we connected to an actual database, a functional database of orders. We ask those prompts about specific things about that data that we have, which retrieve us SQL syntax that we then can execute and pass along the second prompt that Rohit created for us in Portkey, which actually gives a human readable response about our data. So this means that in just 15 minutes, we said 30 minutes, but with introduction and everything, it's kind of 30 minutes, maybe more or less, but in just those few minutes, we actually built a smart generative AI application on the top of our data. That was quite awesome, right, Rohit?
Oh yeah. Love doing this. Thanks, Kevin, for the opportunity. In fact, I'm going to go back and automate a bunch of these processes using just Appsmith and Portkey now.
That's cool to know. So, everyone, this specific application that I created right now is on the Appsmith portal. So, go to the community portal right now. And I also want to remind you that we have our monthly contest. So, go to the community portal and you will find the template that I just created. You can fork it, just change it to something, some other endpoint that you have on Portkey, and it should work. So, what are you waiting? Go to the community portal and fork my template that what I just built, and also participate on the monthly contest. Right now in January, it's all about productivity. We are building productivity apps, and this is a great example of a productivity app. You can build anything you want, to-do list, etc. Go there, create your app, publish it to the template, and then you will be able to maybe win some cool swag. And for next month, I don't want to anticipate it yet because we're not announcing it yet, but I do want to give you a sneak peek that it has to do with something that we built today, with a hot topic on the market. I'm not going to say it, but you probably understand what it is. So we are enabling you with some different topics around this very interesting area, which is AI. So you can be enabled for the next monthly contest. And that way you can also participate, win swag, and obviously learn, which is what we want, which is actually enables you to learn more stuff. So go to the community portal, everything should be there. And also, if you have questions, you can find me and all the DevRel team and the technical team over there and ask questions. And also, you can go to the Discord channel we have, because we have office hours over there. You can join the support office hours and be able to actually ask questions to the support team. So, with that said, Rohit, thank you so much for your time today. And everyone who joined, thank you so much. If you have questions, let us know in the chat. But I think we can call it a day right now, right?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks everybody for
All right.
watching. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the week. And I catch you next week. Bye bye.